if it's working. Never positive and it's working until somebody messages me. So that would be appreciated. A little bit of a delay here. And it says I'm live. All right, let's check this out. There we go. Looks like it's up. So, all right, awesome. I wonder if anyone's going to be on or if everyone's going to be watching Star Wars. I was so not following it this year that I didn't even know it was coming out today. Unusual for me since I was a fan growing up. Oh, hey Ron. Nice. Good to see you. Oh, you'll like my shirt? Actually, I really like the red. This is the first day I've worn this, so it hasn't faded at all. The red comes out really well. Let's see. Let's see. Title. See if I can add anything here. Any links? Comes out really well. Oh my gosh. I'm greater than Star Wars. False. False. But thank you. Just wait for a couple more people to get on. I'm going to add some links here. So I'm going to add a link here to an article I'm going to discuss. Also going to add a link to my Communal Shower subreddit, which is where I found this article. One of the guys there posted it. It's pretty interesting. I'm going to talk about it in a second after I post it. But this was an interesting week. I had a couple interesting anecdotes this week. It's amazing when you're keyed in. You wonder if you would notice this stuff if you weren't into the politics. Subreddit. And then what else? What else? Oh, here we go. Also, for those interested, I have uploaded a new podcast today. I'm not going to be talking about what's in it during today very much, but I just reviewed the book on slavery, The Half Has Never Been Told. Kind of an interesting book, but a flawed book. So if anyone's interested in seeing that, I'll put a link to my podcast down there. Again, that's all free, so you can all listen to that as much as you want, and you don't have to pay. There's no paywall or anything. Probably never will be, given that I'll probably never make any money off it, but that's fine. So let's see. Title. So there's that. And my podcast. Putting the link there. Copy. Paste. Sorry, I can't see any comments right yet. Save. Okay, good. All right, now I can focus. The new Star Wars is garbage. That's what everyone's saying. I'm still gonna see it, but I don't know when. Hey Dave, nice t-shirt. Thanks. Yep. So the first thing I want to talk about is a little anecdote that happened to me in the gym. So most of you know I was gone for 5 months to Montana. I couldn't work out at all, couldn't go to the gym at all, couldn't meet anyone. It was good. I got to read a lot and I made money, but it's good to be back. So I'm getting back into my routine, going to my gym. And the first day that I'm there, I go into the sauna, which is something, it's a ritual. I like to do it after every workout, once a day, 20 minutes if I can. Now, typically, it's adjustable. It's always been adjustable. There's a dial, there's a timer. And most of the guys who use the sauna are a little bit G.I. Joe about it. I think there's a lot of false machismo that goes around where people want to show how tough they are, and they crank that all the way up. And I don't, the thermometer says it gets to be 200, maybe right above the coals. I'm not sure what the temperature in the sauna is, but the bottom line is, even if I've been doing it for months on a daily basis, when it's at full temperature, when I go in, staying 20 minutes is very hard. It's very hard. After about, I've actually timed it the first time I feel sweat. It's kind of interesting. You notice what part of your body do you first feel a bead of sweat. When does it first drip? It takes me about 5 minutes to start dripping sweat from my forehead. And within 10 minutes, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable. I'm starting to feel like this is very hot and your body's telling you need to go. I can usually make it to 15. Making it to 20 is hard. Making it to 20 is I don't want to say painful, but you start to feel nauseous, you start to feel lightheaded, and there gets to be this point you can really tell you just feel like you need to go now, or you're not walking out, you're crawling out. And I can usually make 20 minutes, but it's not easy, and very often it's more like 17 or 18. So I go back to the sauna after 5 months, and the first thing I notice is that they have a new heater in there. They built a new heater. It's brand new, stainless steel. The other one it didn't look dingy, but it clearly was old. And they've redone the wood around that area, so it's all this fresh looking wood. It's not hot. And not as hot. Now it's still hot, like it's still a sauna, you still sweat, but it is, you crank it all the way up, and it feels like it's not even at half the power of the original. And everyone in the sauna, or these are people who go every day, who have been going this entire time, say the same thing. So the story that uh, one of the parts broke in the original sauna, which apparently was 30 or 40 years old. And after it broke, uh, dropped frames. Okay. Can anybody text to say if it's still working? Still says that I'm recording, but this is wonderful. Technology is amazing. It really is. It's also frustrating. Dropped frames. Okay. It looks like it's still working. So I'm going to go back here. Yeah, it looks like it's good now. Okay, so resuming my story. Stopped every 10 seconds. Okay, that sucks. Am I still intelligible? Does it like, or is it like completely garbage? Okay. Thank you, Yellow Blue Austrian Watchman. So everyone's complaining sauna's not as hot. Apparently, the old one was 30 or 40 years old. A part broke. They called the manufacturer, and the manufacturer said, "We don't build this type anymore. We don't have a part. We can't replace this part." But not a problem. You can get a new one. So they got a new one. And apparently the new regulations, which these regulations could very well be 10 years old, right? There may not be regulations from the last year. Basically don't allow the sauna to be any hotter than it is now, which is much less hot than previously. Um, I can't stand when it's too hot. Yeah, people people overdo it. Like, you don't need it to be that hot to sweat. I think there's a lot of, look how tough I am, I'm going to turn it all the way up. Fair enough. But there's also people who like that. There are people who can take it and stay a lot longer than I do. There's a guy from Nigeria who goes and sleeps. He literally lies down and sleeps. Um, but alas, the regulations have now made it so that they cannot be as hot. They are just not as powerful. And is it a huge deal? No, it's not a huge deal. It's not the end of the world. But also, this isn't something that was likely voted on. I don't think that there was a bill put before Congress and, the Sauna Safety Act of whatever. This is going to be a regulatory agency that just has wide discretionary power that at one point did this. And they're very risk averse. Like, to them, they want to eliminate anything that then could fall back on them and say, hey, somebody died. Why didn't you ban this? Why didn't you restrict this? This is why they don't approve drugs unless they've had 10 years and $1 billion put into their testing. Which, oh, that sounds safer, but then people die while they wait for the drugs to pass, or for the drugs that aren't made because they can't afford the $1 billion, or drugs that they're pretty safe, but they're not that extra level of safe. And so people, it's true that maybe some injuries are prevented, but then also some cures are prevented. And if you start to do any kind of cost benefit analysis, you find out that allowing a lot more could be better. Another similar analogy would be like a lot of people die in motorcycle accidents. Well, we could reduce these a lot, not by helmet laws or airbags on motorcycles. We could just ban motorcycles, and the number of motorcycle deaths will go down. And if you kind of restrict your thinking to the one variable of minimizing risk, then anything that raises risk at all should be ended. So this would be obviously motorcycles, saunas, swimming pools, guns, bows and arrows, knives, everything that you could argue, that we can manage to get by without should just be banned or so heavily regulated that nobody dies from it. And of course, the problem here is that there's more than one thing to consider. There's lots of people who benefit from saunas either for health reasons. This is debatable, and I'm not going to make a stand on that. There are people who do think that they are good for you, and apparently there is evidence to that effect. I'm not going to make a stand there, but there's people who still get value out of them even if there's no health benefits, right? They just enjoy them, they're relaxing, and they think that they're a valuable thing. And for someone to come and say, listen, it's not your body, it's not your life. You should not have the freedom to choose to sit in a 150-degree wooden room for 20 minutes if you want. That's something that you should not have the right to make. This bureaucrat in Washington or in Sacramento or wherever it happened to be where this regulation was introduced, they have deemed, based on any rationale, right? They can make an empirical case if they want. They can go and say, well, we did some tests and it turns out that if we can lower the temperature by 20 degrees and there's a 5% decrease in the number of people who have cardiac, blah, 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 or they can just make it up. Right? And they just be like, I don't use them that much, boom. So, now in terms of enforcing the regulation, they're not going to go and check every gym and every sauna in the whole country to verify. They just kind of phase it out, and this part of life is now diminished, right? Anyone who got any value, and look at my gym, that's probably dozens and dozens of people, hundreds of people potentially, and that's just one gym in one little place, and this is just one little regulation, right? This regulation could be a single paragraph or a single sentence in a bill. If we looked at all the other regulations that were passed that year, they would probably number in the tens of thousands of pages or the hundreds of thousands of pages. So every one of them imposes a cost. Sometimes there's a cost of actually implementing the regulation. Let's say a regulation that says you have to add a handicap, right? You have to have a railing or a ramp. Sounds nice, but now all of a sudden every single business has to put in a ramp, and that costs money and resources. But even the ones that don't overtly cost money, they have opportunity costs. So this is just an annoying little stupid thing. Nobody here died. Nobody here was likely to die. If they did, it was because they took risks that they were willing to take. It's the same thing with somebody, again, who rides a motorcycle. People who drive motorcycles are well aware that they could die. So should they not be allowed to drive motorcycles then? Because they could die. And they make the choice, well, I know I could die, but I value motorcycle riding for whatever, the thrill. I don't want a motorcycle ride personally, so I can't empathize directly, but they like the feel of the wind in their hair, or they like the feel of the motorcycle, or they think it looks cool or whatever, and those benefits are enough that they're willing to risk the increased chance of getting in an accident. And who is somebody else? What third party has the moral authority to come in there and say, listen, no, you shouldn't value your freedom or the thrill of motorcycles or the ecstasy of being on the road relative to the slightly increased risk that you will be injured or maimed or killed in an accident. Again, these things, you're comparing values, different valuations that are subjective and vary from person to person, and even within the same person over time. Somebody who's 20 is going to value their life a lot more than somebody who's 80, all things being equal, that same person, right? I've used this example. When my grandmother was really old, she was in her 80s, she got really sick. They could keep her alive, but only with blood transfusions. And there was no real prospect of her getting better where she has a fulfilling life. She's just going to be bedridden and in pain. And so she said, you know what, even though there was an option to keep her alive longer, she decided not to take it. But if she had been 20, she might have said, well, no, I want to keep doing this because even if this isn't great, this is all I really have. and I still want to live a life. And neither one of those answers or solutions or versions is wrong. Both of those make sense. So, all right, still saying that it's 27% frames detached, whatever that means. So, again, encourage people to make comments if it's not working or if it is, so that I can know. Let's see what this looks like. Oh, buffeting, buffeting. Not a good sign. And neither one of those answers or... Okay, there we go. Yeah, it's still on. All right, now not getting any comments. So I'm wondering if this is a problem at this point. Well, this really interrupts the narrative, doesn't it? What are we here talking about tonight? Oh, okay. So I'm getting comments again. Awesome. Hey, Herv3, if that's how you say your name. So again, sauna is not the biggest deal in the world. It's not the end of the world. It's just an illustration of a general principle here, that the meddling of a bureaucracy that's imposing their own subjective valuations on what's safe, what's not safe, what the various things are, by the flick of a pen. I highly doubt, again, that this was legislative. Even if it was, who gives a shit? That doesn't really change anything. And on and off again, glitchy. Okay, let's cross our fingers and hope is better. That's all I can do. So that was my first anecdote. And you start to notice this with everything in life. So the other one that I want to talk about is I'm still running the Communal Shower subreddit. It's pretty small. I think there's about 25 members, and there's one or two who are pretty active on there who post a lot. And I'm the reason I started that subreddit is just because I want to research the topic more. There isn't a lot of research out there. There's not a lot to read or to learn, and so I wanted to create a space where people who were interested could go and post. And sure enough, there are a few people on there who are pretty interested in it and looked it up. So one of the articles that came up, which was pretty interesting, one of the things when people ask why are communal showering decline, and there's a whole bunch of reasons people give, and I certainly think that it is a multifaceted explanation. I don't think that there is a mono cause to that. One of the ones that I've heard for a long time is Title IX. And I've always had a problem with the Title IX explanation because it doesn't seem to me like it correlates particularly well. So Title IX, federal legislation passed in, I think, 1971 or 1972, basically that schools have to have equal facilities for men and women. And this had a big effect on, say, athletics, on sports teams. Like if you had 9 male teams and 1 female team, then you could be in violation of Title IX. The problem I always had with this explanation for communal showers is there's nothing in there about communal showers, right? Men and women can both communal shower. What that doesn't say that they can't in Title IX. Also, the correlation is really poor. People noticed the decline of communal showers in the mid 90s, 95 especially, and Title IX is passed in 1972, so that's quite a jump. That's a 23-year gap. But I'll put a link in the description to an article one of the guys in the subreddit found. See if I can get his name. I mean, he really dug into this, so I appreciate that. I think his Reddit name doesn't matter. If you go to the subreddit, you'll find it. Well, it does matter, but it's not pertinent to the discussion. But anyway, he found this 1981 report, and I'll put a link in the description to it, from an agency who is trying to implement Title IX. So one of the things about Title IX is that when it was passed, they didn't expect every school to suddenly adhere to it right away. They knew that there were going to be logistical problems, that a lot of schools were going to take time. And so in the first couple of years, very little changed. But then you started to get commissions formed, these companies formed that kind of saw their role is to go and advise schools how to conform to the regulations. And so it wasn't until like the 80s that you started to see big changes happening. They're continuing even today. Like even now, you'll find stories of schools that had this or that wasn't in compliance. So this is a 1981 document, and the page in question It's really interesting. I actually looked up the authors, this feminist uh, academic, you say academic, or what would be another word that's not derogatory? An activist. And basically, the document is what do schools need to do gym wise. So, doesn't matter, for instance, if you have a locker room situation where the men's locker room has two toilets and two urinals, and the girls' locker room has four toilets. Well, that's different. So, does that violate Title IX? And the thing is, the language of of Title IX is a little vague. It doesn't explicitly say in every single situation, this is exactly what needs to happen. The interpretation of the law is actually, in effect, the more important part. Um, so they this document is written in kind of a hypothetical what would need to be changed. So we have a hypothetical school. The one example she uses is a Jolly Middle School, so it's just a made up. Um, And, she goes, so Jolly Middle School has a locker room for boys and a locker room for girls. The school is 52% female and 48% male. The locker rooms are equipped with as follows. Boys locker room, 200 lockers, 5 gang showers, 4 shower heads each, 4 toilets, 4 urinals. Girls locker room, 210 lockers, 20 private shower stalls, 8 toilets, 12 hair dryers. So then it goes on with a series of questions, kind of a Socratic. Is Jolly Middle School in compliance with the regulations? Answer, no. Question, why? Facilities provided for students of one sex are not comparable to the facilities provided for students of the other sex. So apparently that's the principle. I don't know if that language is coming straight from Title IX, but if we go down, question, must therefore both locker rooms have the same fixtures? Answer, no. What can be done to ensure compliance with the situation? So this is kind of the more involved answer here. The number of lockers is approximately proportionate to the number of boys and girls. If the school enrollment approximates the national percentage of 48% males and 52% females, and this document is not aged well in the age of woke trans rights, therefore the number of lockers is not the problem. The assumption that boys do not mind bathing in a group while girls do, as indicated by the gang showers versus the private shower stalls, is based on a stereotyped idea that somehow boys have less need for privacy while girls do, is further related to the stereotype notion that boys have short hair and girls long. Both of those concepts are based on same-sex stereotypes and result in facilities that are not comparable. The solution would be to provide private shower stalls and hairdressers for boys in order that both boys and girls have facilities which accommodate individual privacy needs and hairstyles. And then she goes on to say the combination of urinals and toilets in the boys' locker room is equivalent to the toilets alone in the girls' locker room. Boys and girls need not be provided with identical toilet facilities so long as what is provided is appropriate for the real, not stereotyped differences in sex. So this is an interesting, basically 3 paragraphs here. And again, I'll put a link in the description, and you can find this. I think this is on page 12 of that document. So what's fascinating? School is literally children. Yes, it actually is. It's very analogous to prison, and I think it's the most analogous thing to prison in our society. So what's kind of interesting there is she's saying a lot of these perceived differences between men and women are stereotypes, but again, some of them are I think largely true. Uh, but what's interesting here is the presumption that girls and boys don't have the same that it's wrong to think that girls and boys have equal privacy concerns. Well, she doesn't cite where she's getting that from. It's quite possible to me that men and women may have different temperaments when it comes to privacy. It's possible that one or the other is more or less private. I'm not even saying that boys are less private. It could be one or the other. I don't know what the assumption is for saying that they are both the same. But let's just say that they are both the same. The other presumption that she's adding on top of that is not only are they the same, but that they need more privacy, that they need stalls, that having boys not have stalls is somehow a violation. And again, I'm not sure, strictly speaking, if they both had communal or they both had stalls, they would meet the criteria of Title IX. This is another reason why I never really found the Title IX argument particularly pertinent, because it doesn't say that you need more privacy. It just needs there needs to be equality. But here, I mean, this is a person, and I wonder how she's not like the person doing this report is not like in charge of everything, right? She's just a bureaucrat doing a report, although an actor who probably did a lot of work in this area for probably 20 or 30 years. But from her point of view, quite clearly stated in this paragraph, boys need privacy and should not be in gang showers. They should be in private stalls. Also, they should have hair dryers. So there's a couple interesting little quirks in there, but then this kind of is question begging for me. Where did that ideology come from? What is the basis for that assumption? Right? She makes several claims that there's no attribution to where they're coming from or her evidence for it. And like the purpose of the paper is not to address communal showering, so it's not totally surprising that she wouldn't go into all the details about it. Let's see, but yeah. So oh shit, don't do that. So dropped frames detected 24% over the last 2 minutes. 24% of the frames have dropped. What does that even mean? Can someone explain that? Assuming that there's not too many dropped frames to prevent them from understanding. All these are showing up there. So I think there's a general point here. First of all, the implementation on Title IX was a huge burden on schools. And this is something that people like Linda Schrock Taylor, who used to work for, or not work for, but write for LouRockwell.com, and also John Taylor Gatto would make. At the turn of the century, in 1900, I think that there were something like 100,000 school districts in the United States, and now there's more like 15,000. Which, if you think about the population, is now roughly triple what it was in 1900. The idea that there are 10 times fewer school districts is kind of interesting. There's been a lot of centralizing that's been going on. And this has always kind of been sold. Most of these school districts can't be just taken over. They have to, through some kind of democratic means, some type of electoral means, be merged with larger school districts. And what would happen is the local school board would then lose most of its power because it would be diffused, right? If you were a small school, say with 100 students, and you merged with a school that had 900 students, well, now you are only 10% of the school instead of 100% of the school, and your relative power to influence curriculum or anything else has just been decreased at the very least by a factor of 10. And I think it's actually worse than that, because a lot of times what actually ends up happening is some kind of functional elite, some kind of clique that has some kind of direct access or influence, ends up having all the power, and everyone else has basically marginal power, unless they are able to somehow organize in a mass way, which is difficult for a majority to do that against a minority. But centralized school districts were kind of sold on, well, this will be more cost effective because we can centralize resources. So instead of having 10 school districts that each have their own busing and their own whatever janitorial staff and their own administration, we can have one high school and its umbrella of middle schools and elementary schools, which is the kind of the common pattern. And then there'll just be one superintendent and one this and one that, and it'll be centralized and it'll be more efficient. And this, I mean, this sort of makes sense when you hear it, when it's spoken, when it's debated. If you were trying to pitch this to a school district in a tiny town or a tiny suburb or whatever. But the fact is, this has just not happened. As the number of school districts has reduced, the amount spent has gone up. The total amount of spending on education is increasing. So if anything, the inverse is true. The more centralized, larger districts actually cost more money. We can debate why. There could be also other reasons that are independent of the size of the school districts, but basically you get more and more top heavy with the administration. A larger school is going to have not just a principal, but vice principals and assistants and people, hall monitors, and all these other things we won't necessarily find at a smaller school. So that's just in terms of cost. But the other thing is in terms of control. The more the centralized authority comes with more strings attached. The state governments and the federal government are not just giving out money for free, at least in this instance. They want something in return. They want control, curricular control. They want to control how people are taught and what they are taught, what they learn. This is the whole point. Public government doesn't spend money on schools out of charity. They do it to get something. Now, what they get has changed over the years. It hasn't always been the same thing. The original public schools were very much to combat Catholicism or other religions, to get people to be good Protestant Christians, or to make them good Americans, make them good citizens, good soldiers, good workers. And now it becomes a tool in the hands of the culture warriors, people who say, hey, I really, and there's a plethora of a cornucopia of these that fall under the umbrella of the progressive movement. But they could be gay rights activists who say, hey, we want to teach that being gay is okay, and so we're going to make sure that this is included in whatever curriculum that comes to mind. Or sex education, or obviously people who don't like creationism, they want to push evolution. I think most of the people who want to push evolution don't really care about the creationism evolution debate so much as they want to hurt religion, and they want to make people not be theistic, and they think that, teaching evolution will help along those lines, and they're probably right. And so that's why there's a big fight over that, right? But so the distribution of these funds come with strings attached, and Title IX is one of the big strings that came attached to the federal government. That, like, if you don't accept federal money, you don't have to follow Title IX. But since basically every school district does, or nearly every school district does, and that'll be interesting to see if there are any that don't, then you have to. And Linda Schrock Taylor, for those of you who don't know, was a special eds teacher, and she wrote for Lou Rockwell for a long time. And you can find interviews with her with Scott Horton too, going way back, like 15, 20 years from now. But she talked about how you might get 20% of your budget from, say, the federal government, or 10% from the state government. But in order to to meet the regulations imposed, the curricular regulation, the various other regulations imposed by those governing bodies, you would have to spend, say the federal government's giving you 20%, you might have to spend 25% of your budget just to fill all their mandates. Well, then it's not really worth the money. But then they become addicted and they can't really turn it off, or they feel like they can't really turn it off, and they're not going to question it too much, because most of this ideology is coming from like-minded people, right? The teachers who are going to teach at the school, the administrators who are going to teach at the school, they went to the same universities and got educated by the same people who are going to be running the regulations, right? This woman who swoops on down to tell schools how to comply with Title IX, her ideology is probably not going to be that radically different from most of the schools that she's visiting, or most of the educators there, or at least some large fraction of them. So again, kind of the lesson here is that none of this large S is distributed without strings. All of it has, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, and the ideology of the governing body, or at least its bureaucracy, is going to then have this way disproportional influence. All right, so most people aren't necessarily feminists, especially if we're talking about 1970, but they get a hold of the federal bureaucracy, or they get influence over it, and suddenly all the tax dollars that are spent on schooling in the entire country are going to be turned to that. It's very much, I mean, the analogy would be like the Ring of Power in Lord of the Rings. The ring itself doesn't do too much, it's super powerful, but what is it really powerful at? It's powerful at curbing the influence of the other rings. It's making the ring wraiths and the elves and the dwarfs bend to the will of the one ring. And so you have state governments and local governments, which collectively might be more powerful, but they become dependent on the federal government for some fraction of their resources and a big fraction of their ideology. And next thing you know, they're doing whatever the federal government wants, more or less. And we've gotten to the point now, at 40 years after the passage of the Department of Education, where they're basically controlling everything. So, I thought that was an interesting document. I don't think that this is a silver bullet in the explanation of the decline of communal showers, but I do think it helps explain part of it. It also is pointing to an ideological shift, where that's coming from in this woman. I actually looked her up to see if I could find out if she found and ask her these questions directly. Unfortunately, she died about 10 years ago of breast cancer, so I cannot do that. But that would have been interesting. There's definitely an ideology there. There's a lot of unbacked assumptions there that, since she doesn't attribute or make any attempt to justify, you have to think that this is probably a dogma. This is something that is just taken for granted wherever she's coming from. And then that makes me curious, where is it coming from? So, gosh, now this next one is really juicy, and I don't know if I want to tell it when nobody's watching, if indeed nobody's watching. So again, if you're watching, could you please post a comment so I know if it's working? Boop, 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 boop. Dropped frames. Waiting, waiting, waiting. Comments if it's working. No comments. Uh-oh, this is a bad sign. Bad, bad sign. Tell. Oh, so it is working. Okay, so it's not a technical issue. You guys are just not commenting very much. Thanks. Can you give me an update of how bad is it or good is it? Is it like dropping a lot or is it dropping a little? You're watching. What's the quality like? It's working now. All right. So this one is another anecdote. Some of you might remember I have a video I titled "The $1 Billion Blowjob," and in that video, I hooked up with a guy in Washington D.C. I was visiting. I was just on the mall, just sightseeing, and this guy hit me up, and it turned out he was an auditor, and he'd been auditing ICE, which meant for 6 months he'd been going to ICE every day and not doing anything because ICE didn't want to be audited, and he was getting paid lawyer wages, whatever that is, for 6 months to not do anything. Uh, and we met, we hooked up, and we started making small talk, and I was asking him how it was um, to to be an auditor, and he had lots of stories, and he relayed in that story that he audited the Marine Corps and discovered a $900 billion slush fund that had no accountability as who had access, who was depositing, who was withdrawing. And I was like, you mean $900 million? And he goes, no, no, $900 billion with a B, just for the Marine Corps. And I was like, that's the smallest branch of the military unless you count the Coast Guard. He's like, yeah. So this is a similar story. So a couple nights ago, a guy hits me up on Grindr, and he says he's in town for business. Cute guy. So I go to meet him at his hotel, and it turns out he's not in the Navy like he's a sailor, but he works for the Navy. He does procurements. He goes around buying supplies. He said he bought small arms for the Navy, like ammunition, guns, like handguns, and laser sights, that sort of thing. So meet this guy. We have our fun, but we're also making small talk, and he starts talking about the level of corruption, on the fact that they're paying contractors for stuff that they don't need, that they don't want, that they're overpaying, sometimes 10 times as much as something's worth. That they have these sweet deals. He said that they have sweet deals with Canada, where Canada is considered an ally, so they buy a lot of grenades from Canada. Who knew? Yeah, apparently the U.S. Navy buys a lot of grenades from Canada. And because they're such a good ally, that we will pay whatever price the Canadians say. So the Canadians just say a price that's whatever times the value of the grenades, and the Navy is happy to pay. Uh, he said that they have like units that are disbanded, but they continue making orders for the equipment, and so you might have a unit that doesn't exist anymore, personnel who don't exist anymore, and yet the Navy procurement office is still buying hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of ammo for them every year, rifles, whatnot. He said they don't track anything less valuable than $5,000. So if you have night vision goggles that are $4,500, and somebody takes 300 of them out of a warehouse, nobody's going to know. There's not going to be any tracking. They're not going to catch anybody. And he says that sort of thing happens all the time. And more, I relayed that the auditor I talked to said with that, in general, federal employees, they have the first 2 years they're on what's called probation. They're a new employee, they're probationary, and legally they can be fired. Once they pass that, they don't call it tenure, but they essentially get tenure, and they cannot be fired at that point, or it's very hard. It's not technically impossible, but it's more like going through the legal hoops to fire somebody at that point is cost prohibitive. It makes more sense just to let them keep their job and not fire them because it could cost millions of dollars to go through the legal hoops to do this. Or this is another problem with public school teachers often have. They can't really be fired. Like legally, maybe, but the process is made so expensive that it's just not done. And he said, yes, that's absolutely true, and that people with tenure, and I'll just say tenure from now on, it's not technically called tenure, they don't do anything. He goes, there are people who do no work at all. He goes, one of his coworkers, she's got tenure. She does nothing. She goes and she's working on remodeling her house. So she spends all her days, planning how she's going to redo her house. And her supervisor will be like, hey, we assigned you to do this. Can you do it, please? She goes, I'm too busy. And they're like, oh, okay. They can't fire her. They can't dock her pay. They can't do anything with her pension. She just gets to do whatever she wants all day every. And I said, well, this auditor I was talking to said that so the first 2 years they work really hard. Once they get tenure, their work productivity like drops to almost nothing, and then the bureaucracy will go and say, oh, well, their workload is too high. They can't keep up with their work because they're not doing anything. And so we need to hire an assistant to help them. And then the assistant gets hired. They work very hard for 2 years, and then they also decline, and the process repeats. And the guy I met earlier today, or not today, but this week, said, well, that's wrong because they, as a rule, don't fire people even on probation. Even in that first 2 years, they don't fire people. People are still lazy. He said, one of their jobs is to make procurements, is to find things to buy. And he goes, there's a guy on their team has not successfully done this. He's been working there for a year and a half. He has never been able to do it. So his services to the government are literally nothing, right? There's nothing that they can point to and say, this employee of the government, of the Navy, did this. This is what, nothing. There's literally nothing. And there's no backlash. They just say, well, keep trying, but you don't even have to try. And then once you pass the probationary period, then that's it. Like you can explicitly not try. So this is not a secret. I mean, if you go to DC, people will tell you this, and yet somehow this amount of corruption and this amount of waste. I mean, it's likely that if people just did a specific task and actually worked 8-hour days where they were 60% effective throughout the day, or I'm not saying people who are 100%. Who does that? Nobody does that. It's very rare. Like the people who are 100% all the time, like they don't have desk jobs. They're way up there. I'm just talking about your average blue collar worker. You could probably cut the military budget by more than a half. And this doesn't really make us safer. Like paying extra for grenades doesn't make us safer. Having people who work for the military who don't do anything but collect a paycheck. We make fun of like Afghanistan. There's all this stuff with the Afghanistan papers has come out. It's like, oh, we have all these Afghani army people that we're paying and they're not really there and they're not really good soldiers. What this is point. Well, we're doing that too. Now the thing is, we have soldiers who are good soldiers as well, but we also have this massive pyramid of bureaucracy around it. Some of them are actually enlisted people and some of them are not. It's both. Um, you need to find one of those jobs. So move to DC and get a job. I mean, I don't want people to work for the federal government, but someone's going to do it. And they just don't do anything, most of them. And so and the other thing, it's in the interest of the bureaucracy. So let's say you're a bureaucracy and you don't have many employees. So you have 20 employees in your department. Well, if they did have to make cuts or they did want to get rid of something, or if somebody had a vendetta against you, they could say, well, your department's not very important. They probably wouldn't fire everyone. They would probably just merge it with somebody else. But if you have 1,000 people in your department, it's like, oh, well, that's a lot of people. That must be important. So they keep it. That's more people who can vote the way that you want them to. That's more people you can distribute jobs to your friends among. It's easier in a pool with 1,000 than it is in a pool of 10. So there's an interest for these bureaucracies to grow, and indeed that's exactly what they do. They become bigger and bigger and bigger. They don't necessarily do more and more. They might do less and less, or they could do the same amount with more people, or however you want to do it. Or they could have a linear, say they do more, but do we need more? Do we need all these things? Do we need to have night vision where half of it's going to get stolen and sold on the black market, or just buying it when we don't need it? One of the things that came out in the Afghanistan papers, I think, what was it exactly? Some congressman was going there and he was interviewing some of the soldiers, and one of them had a job. These civil affairs officials Their job is to basically distribute money to the Afghans. And he's like, I'm in charge of an area the size of a U.S. county. You know, a few tens of thousands of people. Every month he has to give away $3 million. How can you do that responsibly? You know, is there any way he can do that in a non-corrupt, silly way? It's just a complete gargantuan waste of resources, of time. And again, it's not just the money, it's the opportunity cost, because these are people who presumably could work. Like, the people in the federal bureaucracy are not indigent necessarily. Like, they're not the worthy poor. These aren't people who can't get a job, who couldn't actually do something. They're just not doing anything for the federal government, which kind of is like, maybe that's the solution to like the poor. We can just make them all work for the Department of Defense. We can find all the homeless people, give them jobs in the Department of Defense. Problem solved. It probably wouldn't make any difference. Literally would probably make no difference in the military if we just have all these homeless people working for the federal government not doing anything, which is what half the military is doing anyway. I mean, I have friends who were in the Marine Corps who told me, 1 or 2 years in, he decided he hated the government and he hated the military, and so he had a nominal desk job, but he would just not do it. And they would be like, "Well, why aren't you doing your work?" And he's like, "I fucking hate the government. And I don't want to do this work anymore." I'm like, "Oh, all right, carry on." Like, what are they going to do? They can't fire him. They're not going to put him in front of a firing squad, at least not anymore. So, and I'm not saying that they should, for someone being lazy like that, when it comes to soaking up tax dollars, but I don't live in DC, and in the fact that I can gather stories like this relatively easy without looking, right? I didn't pick this guy knowing that this is what he did. I didn't understand but there's a lot of procurement officers out there, and so, yeah, I'm so wise. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that, even if, well, I do. Thank you. So, yeah, that's gonna, I maybe should do a whole video on that. That's maybe not so glitchy, but, yeah, it was. It was interesting. His attitude of it was he wasn't defensive about it. He wasn't like, he didn't deny it. He didn't make excuses for it. Um, and he agreed that it was completely like nobody does any work and that it's just completely a lazy circus. And I don't think he has any kind of analysis why that would be, but I think it's very clear. Like, if you have a company, there's wastage in companies for sure. We shouldn't pretend that private business is ruthlessly efficient all the time. But there are limits to how far you can push it, right? You're not getting paid with taxes and you're not getting paid with uh, um, inflated dollars unless you're an industry that's in the middle cellular industrial complex and you're serving the government, right? And that's what he said. There's a lot of these companies, they know how to butter the bread to keep the tap going, right? They have a contract and they have a way to perpetuate the contract even if the nominal reason for it disappears or declines or was never even there, right? They can find a way to engineer that they're necessary. Um, but the thing is, a private company that's not reliant on the government, they can run out. They can go out of business. So the amount of fraud, the amount of waste, the amount of redundancy, there are limits to it. Doesn't mean there's zero. There still will be some. I mean, even the most efficient person in the world has moments of laxity, and that's fine. And most companies aren't anywhere close to that. But the fact that there's competition, the fact that they're reliant on making a profit from voluntary exchange and not from tax dollars, to the extent that they're based on voluntary exchange and not tax dollars, um, puts a check on this. So the more of the society that is, the higher percentage of the society that is integrated into the state or directly servicing the state, the higher the percentage of your society that's just not really doing anything. Right? These people are eaters. They're consuming resources. They're bidding up the cost of resources for everybody else. Like all those guys in DC who have jobs not doing anything, well, they still go out to dinner. And when regular people want to go and have a bite to eat, they got to compete with them dollar wise, or they got to go and find a table. They want to buy a car, they got to compete with them dollar wise. So, you want to build a house? Well, there's a lot of people in DC who are building houses, uh, and you're going to have to pay the cement layers and the brick layers and everything else that much more just to get them to pay attention to you. Yeah, but if there's no government, then companies would team up to price gouge, checkmate libertarians. Absolutely, I don't. I have no counter to that. There's nothing I could possibly say that could refute that. Gosh, you should go out and debate. I don't know. You should show up at Mises U one day and just annihilate them with that. DeGarrett. So anyway, that was pretty much it. So we've got for those of you who missed, government regulations made the sauna at my gym not as hot. It's much colder now. It still works. It's still a sauna, but it's not as hot as it used to be. And not is it the end of the world? No, it's a small little thing. But the well, you say it's a small little thing, but we're talking about dozens or hundreds of people having a less enjoyable time for however much they're in the sauna, which in the case for a lot of them is a couple hours a week. So you multiply that, it's a lot. Uh, uh, so that's number one. Number two, uh, the Title IX effect on communal showering. Now, the Title IX effect goes way beyond communal showering. It's affect sports. I remember when I was at Michigan State, I was told straight up the reason Michigan State does not have a gymnastics team is because of Title IX. They used to have a gymnastics team, and then when it turned out that they basically needed to have an equal number of female and male athletes, there were many more male teams than female teams, and so they had to abolish some of the male teams and then create new female teams. They tried to create female teams that had lots and lots of people in them, so rowing became popular. They created female rowing teams, and they were always trying to recruit female rowers. Rowing is not popular in the Midwest, unlike in New England, where rowing is actually popular, at least among men. I don't think it's popular among girls anywhere. Um, and this was just a way to kind of engineer, and it's just it's so phony because if you looked, so Michigan State is usually pretty good at basketball, and the men's basketball team was always popular, and they would always sell out, and they would be in the news and ESPN, and there would be lots of merchandise, and it was, they were a big part of the campus. And then there was a girls basketball team that was also really good, right? They went to the nationals. I don't know if they ever won a championship, but they were a very good team. But it's just not as popular. So when you would go to the arena where they played, the Breslin Center, uh, they installed these gigantic curtains that would cover like 75% of the seats because during games when the girls were there, they would all be empty and it would look really empty and it would look really bad. So you would just have these curtains that would then cover that, and so that all the people who would attend would only sit in the closest 25%, or I'm just drawing that number out of my ass, but the closest fraction of the seats, and then it wouldn't look as empty. But then, of course, when the men were there, they could take those curtains out and they'd fill up the stadium. And the fact that you have an equal number of players just does not convey anything really in terms of what are more interesting, what's drawing bigger crowds. I'm sure many of the girls on the team loved it anyway and probably didn't bother them that they weren't as popular, but maybe some of them did. And some of them nowadays could make the argument like, well, yes, maybe we both were on the team and there is a girls team, but it's not the same thing because we're just not as popular. And so maybe there needs to be some kind of way to force there to be equality of outcome here, where the girls team is as popular as the boys team. And if that can't be done, maybe the boys team should just be abolished. Right? I could totally see that happening. And then the boys could just get sex changes to become trans. They could join the girls' team. They could dominate that. And then there could be, right? Like, so that's kind of where we're at now. Um, but the effects of something like Title IX, right? There was like a slow tidal wave of change in the schools that slowly became more expensive, and slowly started reducing options and dictating how every little school in the country was organized. And the ripple effects, they continue to this day. And part of those effects may have been contributing to the decline of communal showers, which are not gay, contrary to what D.H. Garrett erroneously claims. Da, da, da. So that was that. And then the last one was the hookup with the Navy procurement officer, not officer, agent, and the just unbelievable amount of wastage that goes on there. It's just jaw dropping, and yet it goes on without any comment. When I was in high school, they let a girl play on the guys' football team, but she was stuck on JV until she graduated. I knew a girl, there was a girl in my school who played on boys' hockey teams. And up before puberty, she was competitive, right? And up until that point, she was kind of a husky girl. She was also a twin. She had a twin brother who also played hockey. And she was quite a tomboy. And she could, up until 10, 11, she could be on the ice and compete. But once they started going through puberty, that did not continue, because they become like men, and she didn't. So um, I think she just started playing girl sports, and I don't know how she felt about it. I didn't know her really well, um, but uh, yeah, I mean, the stuff with the trans stuff is really doing a lot for it's raising a lot of questions about girls sports. And some of the most like masochist or not misogynistic people I know, right? People who really, really believe in sex differences, they believe in girls sports. Like, it's good. Hey, that men and women are different, and those differences aren't necessarily value based, right? We're not saying men are better than women in some kind of moral sense. That's not the case, or more valuable on net. But in terms of their physical attributes, they definitely differ quite a bit, and that those differences are significant when it comes to many athletic events. Now, it's not literally every sport and everything. There are certain circumstances where female body type might actually be an advantage. It's just not most sports, most of the sports that people play. And they can't compete against men. Like, literally, it would be no fair. You could have the best girls basketball team and they could play the best boys basketball team. And if the boys had the hand tied behind their back, they'd probably win. Um, so it's good that and I have nothing to like, and to say that guys are better at sports doesn't mean girls can't play sports or shouldn't play sports, can't have a rewarding time. Absolutely, for all of those, they can and they should, and that's great. But if you then allow men to just transition and become women and then just go and dominate, they're going to destroy women's sports. And I'll take this, as I've always said, I think that this trans thing, it cannot be centralized, right? There has to be every league, every school, every gym, every bathroom, they need to decide. You could have a gym, you could be Planet Fitness and be like, we're inclusive. And if a man wants to be trans or whatever and go into the girls' locker room, we're going to allow that. And if you are uncomfortable with that, it's very simple. You don't go to Planet Fitness. Very simple. And another gym could say, listen, we have families here, we have little girls, and we think in our environment that the trans men, maybe they'll give them a different facility, or maybe they'll tell them that they have to stay in the men's room, or maybe they'll say that they have to go supervise, or who knows, maybe they'll just say, we won't even associate with you at all. I would even agree with that. They should be able to make that choice. And if people don't like it, they can boycott or they can take their business elsewhere. That's how it should be handled. It should not be a policy of everything needs to be one way. Unfortunately, way too many people place their own personal preferences on a pedestal, and they believe that they know what's best for everyone. Have you ever heard of this guy named Ryan Dawson? Absolutely, I've heard of Ryan Dawson. I've been a subscriber of his YouTube channel for many, many years. I don't watch all of his stuff, but I've watched a lot of it, and I enjoy it. He and I are not the same by any stretch, but I respect him a lot, and um, you know, I like listening to him to the extent that I do. Oh, oh no. Oh God. So, any other questions? Why are you asking about Ryan Dawson? Mohammed Oda. Can we be Facebook friends? How long have you been watching my videos? I mean, the really smart guys find me on Facebook and just send me requests. It's not that hard to find. Years. Why do you want to be my Facebook friend? You can just be my commenter. Since 2015. Jesus. Your folks are from Palestine. Oh, okay, fair enough. Did they leave during the Nakba? You love me. Okay, no, no, it's weird. So, no, you can't be my Facebook friend. You don't love your Facebook friends. Come on. Have you watched Ivan the Heathen's most recent video? Yes, I did, and I left a comment earlier today. And I think, and look, Ivan the Heathen's great. I love his channel. Uh, um, but I think that it's wrong to think that because something doesn't last forever, it doesn't have any value, which is kind of what he was saying. Um, let's say we achieve a liberal. I'm not saying this is likely, but let's say we achieved anarcho-capitalism in the United States, and we had Ancapistan, and it was great. It had its problems, but it was great. And let's say like he says, like he predicts, in 80 years or 100 years or 200 years, a state crops up anyway because the new edgy culture is socialist or whatever. Okay, I'm not saying that can't happen, and that wouldn't be lamentable, but that wouldn't also make it like worthless that we had 100 years of anarcho-capitalism, right? It's the same thing with like working out. Like your body's going to deteriorate and you're going to die one day. You're going to get old and your body's going to fall apart. At least historically. This maybe technology will change this at some point, but that's where it is right now. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't go work out, that you shouldn't be healthy. Um, like so. I think that he's wrong about that. I think he's very like he's onto something that technological anarchism, and I put this in the comment. But if you look, states are very fascinating. I think one of the most interesting critiques of anarchism, one that I don't find super compelling, but I still think is really interesting, is this idea of like, well, aren't states really common? Doesn't that mean that they're either have a benefit that makes them really common, or just inevitable in some sense? There's something about them that makes them perpetuate a lot. And I think that the problem there is you're saying something's common and therefore that it's necessary. That's sort of the argument. When people use that to justify states, and there's lots of things that are common that we don't say that we need them, right? So venereal disease is very common. Society has venereal disease, but no one says we need venereal disease. It's just something that's able to spread. Other things would be like crime, right? You're going to have crime. You're going to have murders and theft and robbery in any kind of human society, and yet we wouldn't argue therefore it needs to exist. So a really good book here is Against the Grain, about the history of the first states. And basically, in the Neolithic period, states were only viable under very, very specific circumstances. Not just sedentism, not just agriculture, not just irrigation, but irrigation of very particular types of crops, right? So crops that are like root vegetables, or like potatoes that are underground that are difficult to assess. If you look at a field of potatoes, you do not know how many potatoes are there. You have to dig them all up physically and weigh them. Otherwise, you can't do any kind of, and so you can't really do taxes. You can't, with Sweden agriculture, where you move, slash and burn, also known as, if you slash and burn agriculture, very hard to have taxes, right? So the first states only really worked in this very particular, you need something that can be logistically taxed. Otherwise, being a state does not pay. It's too difficult. It's too difficult with hunter-gatherers would be the easiest answer, right? If you have hunter-gatherers, they move around too much, they don't have enough value. You could try, it's not going to work. However, this is not like, obviously they would say, well, we have states that don't exist with irrigation now, so what's the problem? Well, because technology changes the abilities, and a lot of people have this idea. Uh, I mean, so like the techno liberationists, you could where people think, look, technology will free us, but you also have like the technocratic tyranny people who are like, no, the technology, the government's going to have the technology, and it's going to it's going to have a technological advantage over us, and so technology is bad because it helps the state more. And I think that the nuanced correct answer is that it's a double-edged sword, but the balance is there's a balance, and it can go either way. And I think that we've seen that throughout history. There are periods where technological and social changes make states much more difficult, and so you have declining state power. So after, like, say, the breakup of the Roman Empire, for instance, uh, and we could see there are things, if technology made it so that, um, say, taxing was prohibitively difficult, or that, um, uh, uh, exerting marginal violence on the people who resist you was too difficult, then that could happen. So Ivan used the example of 3D printed guns, and I think that's a great example. He didn't mention it, but I think not necessarily Bitcoin specifically, but cryptocurrencies generally, or cryptography generally. So even if you're just using regular money, but you just have encryption that can't be broken effectively, you could achieve that. So it's a fine balance. I don't know what tips the scale one way or the other. Uh, uh, it seems like we had, and I use this in the comment I posted him, with the proliferation of the printing press under Gutenberg, that really undermined a lot of state ideology. You suddenly, way more people could produce uh, content than could before. Way more people became literate. Way more people were reading, and all of a sudden, ideology started to break apart. And we saw this most in religion, right? This is when the Great Schism happened, and Christendom just splintered into a million pieces, unlike it had ever done before. There had been schisms before, but not like what happened after Gutenberg. Okay, and then what you had by the 20th century is there'd kind of been a lot of centralizing. You had these radio and television waves that the government didn't create, and that the government didn't discover, and that the government didn't create the technology to exploit, but the government just nationalized them in 1927 and said, we own all of these, and they gave them out in licenses to their three favorite companies, who basically had to toe the line, and you had this great mass media, the so-called mass media or corporate media. And they were in alliance with the state. Their licenses, their prosperity depends on the state. They're not going to be too anti-state. Now, this does not destroy alternative voices. There are always marginal people in the United States who didn't agree and fell outside the mainstream, but they were marginalized. The internet has kind of brought them back, and the centripetal forces are starting to push the ideologies apart. And we've really seen this already in a big way. Will that continue forever? Will new technology, because you could imagine a new technology coming along that helps the state again. I can't predict what's going to happen in the future. I think that it's fine for him to want um, to focus on that. That makes a lot of sense. Basically, can we create technologies? If you're going to make targeted technologies that you think are going to make practical anarchy more plausible, that's great. And I think that there's probably a lot to be said, because even if we had an ideology shift, let's say we got a enough people to believe in anarcho-capitalism, which doesn't seem likely now, but it's not theoretically impossible. Let's say that it happened. As long as there was profit to be made from having a state, there's going to be incentive, and people are going to be trying to assert it. And they might fail, 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 but one day they won't. And this is kind of what happened when the first states happened, right? They probably were many, many proto states that were attempted and were broken up, attempted and broken up, attempted and broken up, and then finally one of them caught on, and it might eventually fall as well. But as long as there's resources there, if there's a way to efficiently collect uh, taxes and status, then people will try. But if technology makes it so doing so is prohibitively difficult, it could still maybe be possible. But if it's difficult enough, then you could stop that. So that makes sense to me. But the other problem with his argument is him making videos might very well convince the next person who's going to go and create the next technology. There might, so I think that he's wrong to think that there's no role for evangelism or talking about it, because there is. Because we want the technicians, we want the people with the skills to be developing technology that's going to liberate, not incarcerate. Does that make sense? I've watched you long enough. I feel like I've watched you grow up very well, I might add. Well, Ron, I'm pleased you say that, but I'm pretty sure I was like 35 when you first saw me. So I wasn't a kid. I haven't been a kid in a long time. I love you in a YouTuber viewer way. Oh, well, I appreciate that. Uh, I thought you and Dawson could do a video together if he isn't banned. I don't know what we would talk about. We pretty much agree. And I don't know what I could add. There's nothing I could say about Zionism that he couldn't say better. I don't know that I would come at a different angle than he would. And I mean, I feel like he and I agree on enough things. I'm pretty small fish compared to him as well. So, would I like to have a conversation with Ryan Dawson? Absolutely, but I don't even know what. I mean, we agree on most things. The things that we disagree about, he's not an ideologue. Like, he's not an anarchist. I know that, but he's not a dismissive jerk about it either. So I don't even see a lot of point to like debate him about it. Why would we argue? I don't see what the point I was arguing about something when we would both probably agree there are other issues that matter more. Uh, My father's village was destroyed and most of his family fled to Jordan. But they did that voluntarily because the Arab leaders told them to do that. It wasn't because the Haganah or the Irgun was trying to ethnically cleanse Israel, even though they said repeatedly that's what they wanted to do. Uh, you're old enough to be my dad. How old are you? I would have thought you're 18 or 20. I'm 36. I'm almost 37. The first time I made a video, in 2011, I was like 28, and those videos are like 10 years old almost. I've heard about alternative hypothesis of choosing not to do the gay thing anymore. I haven't heard that. Good luck. I get it. Look, you're 19. Yeah, I could be your daddy. You're only 17 years younger than me. I wasn't impregnating females when I was 17 or any time since though. So, do you have daddy issues? I've had this conversation already this week like 4 times. I could do a whole video on that. I probably should. Look, there's oh, Pedro, I was talking to D Garrett, but you're 23. So the gay lifestyle, it has its pros and its cons. It can be a lot of fun. You have a lot of disposable income. There's a lot that's liberating about it. There's a lot of things you can do, but I think Hans Hermann Hoppe was right. You do tend to have, you're less likely to have kids, and that means that you're going to be old and lonely one day. And also, you can have a lot of sex, and that's fun, and that can be a lot of fun. But that can get old too, and it might be more fun to have something that's a little bit more lasting. So I can totally see that happening. Can you please adopt me? You're too old. You're 19. You can't adopt a 19-year-old. And you didn't answer my question, D. Garrett. Do you have daddy issues? Do you celebrate Christmas? So I'm not a Christian, but I do like, go home and visit the fam and all that stuff. Which way should I? I get to go back to the Ivan the Heathen discussion. What do you think about Red Tory Johnson blowout victory? Oh, I probably should have made a video about that. I think that that is more of a anti-Remain backlash. It was so blatant when Brexit passed. I have a lot of friends who are in England who were Remainers, who really believed in remaining. They didn't want to leave. They were against Brexit. They're the urban London liberal, whatever. And yet, when it became clear that many people in Parliament, Theresa May, a lot of people in Labour, and the thing to understand about Brexit also is that it cut across party lines. There were a lot of Tories who were for Remain. David Cameron was the Tory Prime Minister. He was for Remain. And Labour is very split on this. Jeremy Corbyn he officially supported Remain, but if you read what he says and you read his ideology, he was very close to a Brexiter. He really didn't. He thinks that the EU is full of neoliberal capitalists, and he is for state socialism. Right? He wants the government to own everything, which is not necessarily going to work in the EU. So he officially, because that was the party's plan, but there are a lot of Labour people who supported Brexit. So, uh, what you had though is there is this, well, you voted the wrong way. We are going to re-engineer this and have you vote the right way. And there was a backlash. There are a lot of people who said, wait a minute, we have been sold all this shit that democracy, democracy, democracy. We have the biggest vote in UK history. It was close, but it wasn't razor thin. There was a clear victory for Brexit. There's no question of fraud or anything like that. And now they're going to come and say, we're just going to cancel that election and do it again. And I think that there are a lot of people who are like, no, fuck that. That's what people decided to do. That's what we're going to do. And Theresa May, she pussyfooted around that in the most transparent way. There's some really funny videos of how she would say, well, we're going to say we're Brexiting, but we're going to, in every way, still remain part of the EU. We'll just say that we left. Um, so I think that's what's mostly going on. The other part of that equation, the other big part of that equation is Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn gets slammed with anti-Semitism all the time. As somebody who gets slammed with anti-Semitism also, I think a lot of that was unfair. Some of it was fair. I don't know that he's actually an anti-Semite, but his rhetoric was way too far out there, too close to that. And he's just a really unlikable guy. And so a lot of people were turned off by Corbyn. I have friends who were huge Corbyn friends. When I went to England in 2017, one of my Cambridge slaves, he was just loved Corbyn, 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 Corbyn. He was so into Corbyn. He's helping Corbyn. And in the last year, he's just been like, Corbyn is destroying this party. He's destroying this country. No. And he switched to the Lib Dems, who did terrible as well. So I think the main thing is people were like, this is another referendum, and people are saying, the people spoke in Brexit. We're speaking again so that you hear. I think a lot of those Labour voters who maybe did what the party said that they should and voted Remain back in 2016 has said, okay, no, now we're actually going to leave. And the other thing is the labor shift, and we've seen this in the U.S. as well, where the Democratic Party has stopped being so much for the blue collar working class factoring people in the Midwest and become the woke social justice warrior party of the Beltway. And fuck you, racist white people who work in factories. Well, those people will all not vote for you. And this happened in the UK. So yes, London remained Labour most primarily, but the north area of the country where you've got a lot of poor, very socialist leaning, like these are left wing, these are not libertarian people, but Labour's abandoned them, and so they abandoned Labour. And Boris, I don't know, he's going to do Brexit. That's 100% now. The rhetoric has shifted. My Remainer friends are like, there is no Remain anymore. There is only, should we rejoin? We're going to have to wait for the economy to, this is what I was told. We're going to have to wait for the economy to crash and then try and rejoin. And that will have to be several years down the road. On the other hand, Labour might come back because if Boris Johnson doesn't some way placate the North, they'll switch back to Labour or the Lib Dems maybe. But I'd say STDs are the main drawback to Brexit. No, yeah, I mean, STDs is a real issue if you're gay. You have to deal with it a lot more. My dad is the smartest person I know. Is that a reference to me or somebody else? If you're daddy age, I'm Gramps. I'm definitely daddy age. As soon as I grew a beard, it started to come out. I don't think you necessarily need to be in a nuclear family structure, but you do need, I assume you mean, you do need strong social bonds as you get older. Yeah, you don't have to have a family. There are other ways to do it, but that's just like the most reliable way. It's the lazy way to do it. It's the best way to do it. Some people would argue. United States Marine Corps, Afghanistan. Wait, what is that a reference to? What about the United States Marine Corps in Afghanistan? Let's see. So I'm not an expert on UK politics. I only know what my friends say. Again, this is a gay network thing. I have a lot of gay friends there, on both sides, Tories, Labour, Lib Dems, mostly Tories. But again, they were split. Like a lot of my Tory friends in the UK were Remainers. Um, and I think most of them probably still voted for the Tories, right? So the the Tory remainers were not going to vote for Labour, and the Labour Brexiters were not going to vote for Labour either. That's kind of what happened. This was very much. Um, I'm on like a full minute delay. Holy Jesus! Sorry, it's not my fault. It's the algorithm. It's the algorithm's fault. So this, I don't think that this election pretends to the Tories having a majority forever. I think it pretends to Brexit happening, and then the parties will split, but it will be on a Brexit basis. That will be the new status quo in the UK, and I think that Labour will regain many seats in the next election after Brexit is done. Um, oh, you served in Afghanistan. I'm not gonna thank you for your service because technically I don't think you did a service because unless both parties agree, I'm just shitting with you, but like unless both parties agree, I didn't hire you to do anything in Afghanistan. Uh, if you're, have you heard about all these Afghanistan revelations? Nothing. Yeah, military waste. There we go. Uh, oh, now we're getting comments. Yeah, I mean, there's a anarcho-capitalist, or at least former anarcho-capitalist by the name of Roman Skaskiw, who I know has watched my channel before. He lives in the Ukraine now, but he was in Afghanistan twice. And the second deployment, he was an anarcho-capitalist. The first time he went, he was a standard like American conservative. Then he got into Ron Paul and became an anarcho-capitalist, and then he got redeployed. And he talks about like at some point he was dispersing money. And he says it feels good to give away other people's money. You feel like you're really helping, but like, what are you really doing for America? Nothing. What like you're just wasting money for virtue signaling essentially. It's it's just completely asinine. And like Scott Horton has a saying that like as soon as you have the army, the company that makes the toothpaste for the army is going to be lobbying for more soldiers, more army, more bases, more deployments, and that's just the small that little thing, but it's going to be billions of little things pushing and big things too. So um, it it really is the worst part of the government. My dad was a huge Ron Paul supporter, which is how I found out about libertarianism. So how did you find out about me? Also, if you're a kid and your parents are libertarian, shouldn't you rebel and become anti-libertarian? I feel like that's what should happen. I realized it was a lie. Oh, this is interesting too, now that you mentioned that, Mohammed. Um, Recently, Nancy Pelosi was asked why is she trying to impeach Donald Trump when she did not try and impeach George Bush? And her answer was extremely interesting. She confirmed a lot of things that people suspected but did not know for sure. So she said that when she became Speaker of the House, I think it was in 2006, there was enormous pressure to impeach President Bush, and the list of reasons why is pretty long. It could be Guantanamo Bay, it could be torture, it could be NDAA, it could be the Iraq War. And she said that while she was in Congress, she was in the quote Gang of Four. She was on the Intelligence Committee, and so she had access to all the classified material that the executive had. And she knew, she says this, she confirms this, she knew that there were no WMDs in Iraq, that they had nothing, that it was a nothing burger, that it was a lie. She knew that. And so she was saying, like, this is a reason why he probably deserved to be impeached. But she goes, I didn't want to do it because we had just impeached Bill Clinton, and I didn't want to make it like a thing where we do it to everybody. So basically, because Clinton got impeached, Bush was going to get a free pass, which is outrageous because Bush killed like 1 million people. And also, Nancy Pelosi, you know, you know that we're going to war and that it's based on lies. And how is that? Is that not an abuse of power, right? Donald Trump called Ukraine to have a very corrupt Biden investigated. That's an abuse of power. But lying to get us into the Iraq War is not. And the other reason is because she was in on these interrogation or on this classified information. She knew about Guantanamo Bay and the torture, and she didn't do anything about it, she's fucking complicit. So the worst crimes, this is why the worst crimes are not gone after, because there's partisan complicity there. So Ron Paul, Scott Horton got me unplugged. Yeah, same here. Scott Horton really pushed me into anarcho-capitalism, and so good for you. I found out about you because your Stefan Molyneux video, because I was once upon a time a hardcore Steph fan. I hope I had something to do with ending that. I haven't watched Steph in a long time. It just I can't bear it anymore. Uh, did you see Red Dawn as an anti-war movie? I can't say that I did. It seemed to me like a patriotic movie and a pro-gun rights movie, not an anti-war movie. I'm assuming you're talking about the 1984 version and not the remake from 2007 or whatever that was. Fool's Errand, Scott Horton's tremendous book. You, FDR Liberated, and Jim Jesus got me off Molyneux. Yeah, FDR Liberated is a great page, and they posted some of my stuff there. I think that's how a lot of people found my videos. And those videos still have legs. I don't know; those people still watch those. It's funny. Stuff on Molyneux videos and the Venus Project videos are like similarly. They get the same number of views, and I consider those to be kind of similar ideologies in a lot of creepy ways. Which I'm sure they would both hate that comparison. Um, we're going to see. I think Stuff's ideology, since he's younger, is going to last a lot longer now that Jack Fresco is dead. But that does not answer my question. Why are you adopting the ideology of your parents? You're supposed to rebel and have a different ideology. The first video I saw of yours was the Gay Network. Also, do you think meat gives you cancer? I do not think meat gives you cancer if you don't burn it. If you don't burn it, you should be fine. Good for you. Look, there's something about Steph. There's something to be admired about him in that he just said, hey, I'm going to be a YouTube philosopher, and fuck, he did it. He's been successful. He's been financially successful to some degree. We don't know exactly how much, but he's making a living. And even more than that, a lot of people listen to him. He's got, a small group that's dedicated, right, that hang off every word he has. Then there's a larger group who are influenced, right? They listen to him a lot if they don't necessarily become his zombie. And then you have a lot of people who value his content. So like that's a lot. That's to, and also he connects with people in a way that's difficult. A lot of people they're totally average. They're not into libertarianism. They're not into anything, and they'll stumble across Stefan Molyneux, and he can resonate with some subset of them. It's a skill that a lot of cult leaders have. Now, that doesn't make him a cult leader. It's just a skill that he shares with them. Yeah, and so I admire all those things are admirable things. But and I thought about this a lot reading Deidre McCloskey's books. So her books are on virtue, and the thing is, you have to have kind of a balance in your virtues, and he's totally unbalanced, and it's really bad. I see the Wolverines as the Viet Cong and the Russians as the Cubans. Yeah, I think that's a stretch. By the way, this is the first video I have ever commented on since I signed up in 2011. Wait, this is the first video you've ever commented on YouTube, period? Like any YouTube video or my YouTube video? Steph has made 600 plus Bitcoin, so he's doing well. Okay. Well, look, don't get me wrong. All my videos about stuff have been criticisms, and we could go on and on and on. I was just trying to say, like, there are things about him that are admirable. Uh, there's a lot about him though that's incredibly petty and annoying, and so cringe. He's so cringe. Some of the stuff is I can't watch him anymore. Like it's like nope, I can't. It's too. It's too much. It's too awful. But there's an inoculation that happens. The more you know, the more you can sniff out other people's bullshit. And if you go on my podcast, which plug it's in the thing and it's free, so you can go and listen to that. You know, when I read the Half Has Never Been Told, that's a good book in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of bullshit in there too. But if you don't know any better, you don't know that it's bullshit. Or if you never read another book on the history of slavery, you're not going to know anything. And so when somebody says, well, slavery created American capitalism, and they give you a narrative to that effect, if you don't know any better, it's going to sound good. And the same thing with Molyneux. When he would say stuff like, I invented DROs, if you didn't know anything about Gustav de Molinari or the Tannen Hills or Hans Hermann Hoppe, you might think, wow, that's a real cool innovation. He's a smart guy. When really, no, I mean, he is a smart guy, but like that stuff has been around for at least 150 years. So he's not an original thinker, and he just passed himself off as one. I know that was for me the first, like, wait a second, this guy is either bullshitting or he's ignorant, one or the other. Okay, uh, Mohammed, while I'm honored that this is the first comment, why is this the first time that you've commented on a YouTube video in 8 years? Did you see when Steph said an employer your IQ test results during a job interview? Nope, never saw that. Look, I used to be, not just Steph, I used to watch everything on my YouTube feed back in the day when I was unemployed and whatever, and I didn't have a life. After I started meeting guys, after I joined a gym, after I started doing jujitsu, I just don't watch that much YouTube anymore. And so I haven't watched this Steph video in months. I probably watch one or two a year, but I used to watch every one. I was never a big enough fan to go back and watch everything. That's like top level. Yeah, I lost interest in Steph when he started supporting Trump, but there were always bad arguments. Yeah, and the other thing is, he was viciously against Ron Paul. Like, he compared Ron Paul to the Klan explicitly. My father, the Klan reformer, or something like that. And he did videos about how stupid Ron Paul, like, support, you shouldn't give Ron Paul money. I think he was worried because he saw a dip in donations because people were donating to Paul and not him. And then to come out for Trump, just, oh my God. Steph is obsessed with women in their 30s who don't have kids. I don't need to know that. Thank you, though. So, Mohammed, why are you now commenting? What is it about this that's made you finally break your silence? And when were you in Afghanistan? What year? Do, 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 do. I think Steph had kind of risen in the libertarian circles. He's getting invited to libertarian events, whether they be Park Fest or whatever, and he was kind of like the king of libertarian YouTube. And I did a video of this on the rise and fall of the YouTube anarchists or anarcho-capitalists. There was this plethora, this really rich amount of debate and discussion. I think discussion is even a better term on YouTube in 2006, 2007, 2008 of YouTube anarchists. Liberty is not given, ex omniverse, Austro Libertarian, Brain Police 2. I'm going to miss a whole bunch that are great that I just can't remember them all. And uh, and Steph was one of those people. He was included in that, and all the other ones, they got bored, they moved on, they either stopped or they declined in their output, and he's just kind of absorbed all of that. And then he started to get popular, and I noticed it may have started before. I noticed it with the Andrew Zimmerman video, which I thought was a really good video. Like, the guy has made really good stuff over the years. The nature of your enslavement and how you live on a farm and all that's all good stuff that I really like. Um, and good production values, whatnot. Um, And I think he got a whole bunch of right-wing people who weren't libertarians. And at the same time, he burned a lot of bridges with libertarians, especially with the True Sheep stuff and the intellectual property stuff and lying to Joe Rogan to his face and a lot of people. So he kind of lost his base and got a new base that was bigger and more profitable. But he's in an awkward position because he made all of his philosophical heft, it's all based on libertarianism. If he was really the smart guy that he thinks he is, he would come up with a new philosophy, a new UPB that A wasn't pure shit, that somehow justified, Trump. And then he could say, look, I've created a conservative philosophy that supersedes libertarianism. That's what he should do for financial reasons. But I don't think he will, because then it would admit that he was wrong, and his whole point is that he's perfect and that he's always right, or that his opinion is the truth. And so he can't admit, oh, I was completely wrong when I wrote that, even though he clearly was. Do you like Star Wars? So I grew up loving Star Wars. There's no question that the original trilogy, and especially Empire Strikes Back, is like my favorite movie. And but they suck now. So like I don't know if it's how much of it's because I grew up, but it's a shame. It's a fascinating phenomenon, those movies, how they became so popular and so important. And you can find other movies that nominally made more dollars, like Titanic or Avatar or Gone with the Wind, if you adjust for inflation. And yet none of those movies have the cultural force. People don't go around dressing up like Avatar. They don't go around dressing up like Rhett Butler. They don't incorporate, they don't LARP it, they don't make videos about it. It's just something. George Lucas is a creative guy, whatever his faults, and he has many. He's also a great entrepreneur. That's something people overlook. He's a tremendous entrepreneur, but he had a great idea, and he was a sufficiently skilled filmmaker that he basically captured lightning in a bottle in the most exhilarating art. I don't just say movie, in the most exhilarating form of artistic expression that that's up there with the Ring Cycle or Michelangelo's De Vader to Sistine Chapel. I'm that serious. It's just amazing what he has there. And people dig how much of that is from The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and how much of that is John Williams, and how much of that is Ralph McQuarrie's artwork and all this stuff. And there's a really good book if you're interested called Star Wars Conquers the Universe, which kind of goes into a lot of that. And nothing that I mean, and the original trilogy, and I would include Return of the Jedi there, they all integrate that very well. There are problems, but they're small in the totality. And the prequels have just not they didn't live up to it, and the sequels have just been a total mess. They look great. There's maybe some potential there, but they're not very good anymore. Uh, you can make a pretty good Steph versus Steph video with his old arguments against Ron Paul used against his new arguments for Trump. You absolutely could. He made arguments. I think one of his best videos was against immigration restrictions, and he did this whole video why there shouldn't be a wall and why immigrants are okay and there's nothing wrong with immigrants and they help the economy and blah blah blah. And the last line of his, it was the best thing I ever heard Molyneux say. At the end of his video, he goes, "Walls can also keep people in," and then he turns the camera off. Oh, that's such a that doesn't necessarily clinch the argument, but that's a very poetic, very pertinent, very very good point, and delivered so well. And if you listen to him now, where he's like, human white people are K species and Mexicans are R species or whatever, and it's just like, who is this? He's completely shifted. Ba, ba, ba. Aaron0883, yes, he's one of them. He also watches my channel occasionally. Fear of being doxxed for supporting the freedom of the people of Palestine. Listen, don't worry about the Hezbollah trolls. I mean, they're I think the Israelis have to use kid gloves in the United States. Um, Dave, have you ever heard of the gun in the room? Mean the worst argument for libertarianism ever? Yes, I have. After you adopt me, can you take me to see Star Wars? You're too old. I can't adopt you. I'll give your podcast a listen tomorrow. Thanks a lot. There are 8 episodes up there, so go ahead and feel free. I'll put up at least one a week, maybe more. Bro, I miss you, but you really need to take the cringe pill, whatever that is. Uh, Circ Operation 2 year ago update. Quite uncomfortable when lying down. Still have premature E issues. Wagner is great. Wait. Pedro the Rabbit got circumcised 2 years ago? If you told me this story before, I don't remember, so you might have to rehash it. Um, Seems like Steph's figured out he can get more donations by appealing to Christians, as he figured out supporting Trump is also lucrative. Yes, I think that's definitely true. Go figure. People who are like habitually donate money are good people to have to ask for money. O'Day. I heard Lucas didn't write the original script for Star Wars. I think he did. From what I've read, he did. But there were input. There was help from other people. He didn't write the entire crawl. Who's the guy who did The Godfather? I think he wrote some of the initial crawl. He had help. Look, it was a group effort. He wasn't like a maestro who did everything himself, and I don't even think he would claim that. But he was definitely the most important person. Uh, Still glitchy. I bet this is related to your YouTube partnership. No, I've already made them like $5, so I'm sure they're going to give me the best feed possible. Um, what makes the Star Wars story so compelling to you? Yeah, that's a good question. It's just a cool story. I thought the world building was excellent. It just seemed like a real. The people use the term lived in universe. It just seemed like a real universe. It didn't seem like, oh, these are sets for a movie. There were references to a wider society that were kind of offhand that made you look real, and there's just something really magical about the Force. Um, and I think the most pertinent like theme that I thought was just the idea of power, um, how power can corrupt you, how you can harness power, but there's this fine line as you become powerful that you how do you wield that in a responsible way, how it can be alluring, the allure of power. I think the prequels really messed that up a lot, but there's a lot in the original trilogy that speaks to that. Your stream sucks because they replied net neutrality. Could be. I don't know. Uh, he's always been a closeted racist, even as an anarcho-capitalist. We don't know. Could be. Wouldn't surprise me, but we don't know. It's just he's not he's not intellectually honest. He's not someone that you can trust that he means what he says. Uh, I I'm always torn between does he believe his own bullshit or not, and I tend to think he believes most of it, but some of it, but I don't know. I never thought of Steph as racist until he started siding with the system against Eric Garner and that lady in DC and ran from the cops. Yeah, he became really pro-police in a disturbing way, and that's coming. I fully understand the ridiculousness of many of the SJW. The police are always racist. I mean, the police are not always racist. The police do fucked up shit all the time that has nothing to do with race, uh, and yet I feel like he thought it would be more popular to be the Law and Order guy. What do you think about Jacob Hornberger? So, I'm an old libertarian. I've been a libertarian. I've been an anarcho-capitalist for 16 years now, and so Hornberger, I know him. I think originally from listening to him on Scott Horton, but not recently. I'm talking 10, 15 years ago, and I met him at PorcFest this year actually, but I didn't talk to him. I saw him around. So he seems like a great guy. He falls into that category of what, and Horton has pointed this out. He's a minarchist, but he hates the state. like passionately. He's one of those people who, like, it's evil, but we need it a little bit. And yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But uh, I think if we're gonna have a libertarian party, they might as well be fucking libertarians, right? They might. It doesn't make sense to have Republican lights. And so I think that having principled libertarians, and there have been before, obviously Harry Brown, I would definitely put Michael Badnarik into that category, even though he's not spoken of that much today. But Bob Barr and Bill Weld and Gary Johnson, definitely not. And so I don't know enough about the other people running to say I prefer Hornberger necessarily, but he definitely fits the bill. He's the right kind of guy, and he also has that. He's conservative, he's religious, so he doesn't come across necessarily as radical, and he can attack the state from the right, and I think that's where libertarians need to attack the state from the right. Uh, it's easier when you it's easier to lie when you believe half of what you say. Yep, probably true. I also think Steph has a really good way of rationalizing anything. You know, this is how he debates people as he rationalizes, and he can rationalize again the True Sheep situation, which blatantly violated principles that he had spoken on very explicitly many times, and you know, it was a clear violation, and I'm sure he could tell himself, no, 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 I'm stopping bullying. There was bullying going on. I was preventing an app violation. Uh, what are your thoughts on Steph riding the men's rights movement? Well, first of all, I'm sympathetic to the men's rights movement in large part. I don't know everything about it, but I do think that the system, I don't know if this was intentional or not, uh, has been detrimental to men, especially if we're talking about divorce court, or we could talk about other things as well, or men getting custody of their children. Um, and there's a really good novel on the way that really influenced me a lot. It's called Blind Baseball. It's probably not very well known, but I met the author once when I was in Michigan. It's a really great novel. It's a short book, kind of dramatizing a guy going through divorce, and Joe Sobran called it the 1984 of divorce or something like that, and it's an apt title. So I agree with a lot of the men's rights movement, uh, and especially if they're going to oppose circumcision, which a lot of them do as well. But Steph writing it, I don't know that there's anything in the men's rights movement that is compromising to a libertarian position, so I don't mind him coasting off of that. I kind of coast off of a little bit the whole foreskin stuff and the circumcision stuff. I believe all that, but it's not directly related to libertarianism per se, and yet that's become a big part of my channel. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think so. I don't think he's compromising his principles if he's writing on the men's rights movement. That could just be smart marketing, and I don't necessarily have a problem with it. It's a bigger problem when he's coasting off of Trump and off of the alt right and off of racism, um, and that's also what he's doing. Uh, he once called Obama an affirmative action president. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily racist though, and Obama was shit. So this is something I just heard Michael Malice talk about too. He was talking about how Buttigieg is kind of this unknown mayor, and it kind of does draw parallels with Obama, who goes from nobody's ever heard of to the nominee, like immediately, and that just seems so out of the blue that it begs the question of who, like, there must be somebody behind the scenes pulling the strings. Uh, the first chick I fell in love with moved to Keene, New Hampshire, and has 3 kids. I have no right to disrupt this. Cringe pilled. Are you from New Hampshire? Whenever you're my dad, are you going to try and turn me gay? Wait, you're not gay? You're a straight boy who wants a gay man to become your daddy? You're going to have to run that by me again. I know about family court and the nightmare good men go through. Good, normal men, powerful men, this is not true. If you're the governor or whatever, you can game the system, or you can make it work for you. But if just a regular guy is going to get fucked, if the woman wants. Now, if he has a good wife or whatever, and she goes out of her way, it can work out okay. But if she wants to fuck you, she can. Boop, boop, boop. Don't respond to me. I'm a super dork. Too late. I responded to you. Boop, boop, boop. I can definitely see why Ivan. Look, you make a video, you have no idea how many people who. I mean, you can see how many people watch it. You don't know how many of them actually listen. You don't know how many of them find it valuable. And even if they do, you don't know what they're going to do with it. So I can totally see like the cost benefit analysis going, what am I doing here? Because it's almost like voting. Like you vote, and you don't know how much your vote has any effect. It has no effect, probably. So I can see that being frustrating. Now, for me, if you enjoy doing it, then there's no harm. If you don't enjoy doing it, if it's a chore, right? If you're spending lots of time, then yeah, it's totally different calculation. I think he's being a little hard on himself too. Like, I ramble and blah 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 blah, and like, it's fine. People like to listen to him. I like to listen to him. He has something to say. How he says it is not as important, and I wouldn't say he says it poorly. I think he's being a little too self-critical there, which is fine. It's good to be self-critical to a point. Uh, I got circed halfway about 2 years ago. I'm pretty uncomfortable, but yes, PE is still an issue due to sustained oversensitivity. And then it goes on to Revenge of the Sith is the most powerful and politically meaningful. Yeah, so Revenge of the Sith has some very overt political messages in there that are good ones. They're just not acted very well. And why did you get circumcised? Courts are for the rich. Yeah, so this is the funny thing when you debate anarcho-capitalism, is people will be like, you have to have the government because what about poor people? Poor people won't have a fair shot in a private property court. It's like you think they have a fair shot now? Anyway, like it's the same thing with like school. Like, oh, you got to have government controlled schools because what about poor people? Like, bitch, poor people get fucked in public schools. Public schools don't go. There's no evidence that if you have a really poor person with a shitty home life and there's a public school in their area that they're forced to go to that they turn out okay or that they're like it's totally asinine. The thing is with private property courts, with free market courts, number one, there's more options. Number two, all the options are cheaper, which means number three, more people can afford decent service, right? Decent coverage. And there's other things you can go like, well, what about a rich person and a poor person going against litigation against each other? There are answers to that. Poor people can sell their claims to other rich people. You can form associations. You can be an insurance company. So yeah, you're poor, but if you're in a $12 billion insurance company and you get in a fight with a millionaire, well, you're kind of not on unequal terms. This is one of those things. People have these knee-jerk responses. Usually, it's something or something the poor, as if what we currently have or what we could even hypothetically have with the government helps the poor, and it just doesn't. The government is an elite, high status, high power bureaucracy. It's an aristocracy, maybe a democratic one perhaps, or maybe a bureaucratic one, or both, but it's still that, and they're going to have more power and more wealth than everybody else. Oh, look at all these ports. I wish Tulsi was better on gun rights. I do too. She's wrong about most of her topics. She's just right on war, which is the most important. And a few other things. She's got good nuance on a few other things too. She's a Democrat. Don't get greedy. Yeah, Ivan is valuable even if he doesn't think so. I plan on being elite in my future. Why don't you comment on Ivan's video and tell him that? Uh, Uh, Tulsi is an authoritarian gun-grabbing socialist. Maybe she is. We'll never find out, though, because she's not going to get elected. Yeah, she's not even that non-interventionist. Her foreign policy isn't even that good. Yes, this is the Scott Horton point. She's just the least bad. Her definition of a just war is so big that, as Scott Horton says, Barack Obama could drive 10 wars into it. It's really bad. It's just not as bad as anybody else. Uh, Certainly nothing like Ron Paul, though. It took one speech from Ron Paul to turn me in the right direction. Well, he was a good speechifier, even if he wasn't the best speaker. The Australian government recently had a Senate hearing about the proposed policy to ban cash transaction over 10K. Have you read it following this? I'm not following it, haven't heard of it, but there has always been a push to make it easier for them to track everything, so that makes sense. Teachers are like cops in many ways. Absolutely, they have all this authority over you. You have to obey them. They can compel you. They're not as bad as police, but they're up there. Let's see. Status always points out the negatives of the free market, but the question to always answer is, as opposed to what? The non-free market choices are always worse. Yeah. So there is no utopia. It's always what is the most optimal possible. What is the least bad? And I think that's definitely free markets. Um, I think Tulsi is good on identity politics. I think so too, relatively speaking. So she's not only it's not only war. That's the most important thing that she's not right on, but better on. Um, The difference is that it's more difficult to conceptualize how there can be a court system whose ruling is accepted by an entire society without it being backed by a monopoly of force. No, I just don't think that's true. When you have societies that are anarchic, that have legal systems, they are still backed by the whole society. So if we look at Icelandic society, it's the most famous example because David Friedman wrote about it. The saying there was that there is no king but the law. People respected the law. It was a very litigious society. The same for like the Zir in Somalia or the various Romani courts or the Amish courts. So this is with ideology. This is totally possible. Um, and these systems don't break down because they're bad at law. They break down because they're conquered by other states. That's why. Uh, I got circumcised because of phimosis. We talked about it a while ago. I'm a statist who got circed. Long story short, I didn't want to use metal band rings for years just to be able to get some. Uh, Personal question: was the phimosis really a problem? I know guys who have phimosis, and it's not a problem. They can't retract. They've never retracted. They've never seen the head of their penis, and they're fine. Now I know other guys that's not true. Maybe not be true in your case, but. Uh, Pedro the Rabbit. Ron Paul is a no-nonsense dude. He never endorsed a Republican Party nominee, as he should not have because they haven't had a good one since I don't even know. Ron Paul was the truest, in my honest opinion, but Rand was a bit of a dork all along. Both the writer and his son, unfortunately. Yeah, Rand has been a disappointment. Not clear why. I think he tried to play the role of a moderate, which maybe he is. I'm not sure, but he couldn't do it. He can't. He's not going to out moderate Jeb Bush. Uh, Don't worry about responding to me. I'm too stupid to be worth consideration. Well, then don't comment if that's how you feel. Why do you think private law is the last hurdle for most people? I'm not sure that it is. I think the military is the last hurdle for most people. Uh, uh, and I don't know, it's probably just what they're taught. Like this, there's this idea that you have to that to have that you have to have an impartial third party, which I think that makes sense. But then to do that, you have to have a state, and that's not true. If you have A and B, all you need is a C, but that doesn't have to be the same party in every case. But that's what people are taught. I mean, it's that simple. What do you think of Rothbard's claim that academia are the priests of the state? I mean, it's a metaphor. I don't know, like if it's perfectly accurate, but like they're paying them for a reason. Um, they kind of explicitly have been in many cases, many states. That was the whole point. That isn't explicitly the point in the United States. Uh, so I don't know. I feel like since they are subsidized, they're going to have that tilt. Uh, I'll keep an eye on your live feeds, and if you want to nitpick about the war on terror from the perspective of a former military dog, hey, post away, man. Anything you want to say. Look, I'm a bit drunk, and this is my first live stream. What's the occasion? Why are you drinking? It's only Friday night. Why aren't you all out watching Star Wars? If you don't mind my asking, what is your IQ? Well, you can ask. I don't know what it is, so I can't answer. I've taken IQ tests, but they were online, and so I don't think that they're necessarily that valuable. Uh, I was at a god knob bang when my mill went the hard on. Wait. The turtleneck almost choked out the head because it was so tight. It may have tore. Gotta tell you, it looks pretty. At least the head. So it sounds like you have paraphimosis. Should have done the discs, man. I'm surely in the camp of Curtis Yarvin. Wait, what? Are you Jewish? Wait, so Pedro the Rabbit, did you start watching my video because of the foreskin restoration stuff or the libertarian stuff? And you just happened to be circumcised? Hmm. Everyone's out drinking. Don't want to waste my time or my money. On what? Everything on my channel is free. What were your parents' upbringing like? I wasn't around at my parents' upbringing, so I can't say. It was before my time. What should I get my mom for Christmas? A pink handgun. And I wasn't asking if Pedro was Jewish. I was asking if Akira Kazuya was Jewish. He doesn't want to waste it on Star Wars. Yeah, that's a good point. It's Friday, and Ivan reminded me of the way I liked you. How did Ivan remind you of the way you liked me? Uh, Stephen Kotkin does not think the Holodomor was a genocide. Well, I just read his biography on Stalin. That was not the impression I got. Um, it, I, his take is that Stalin was just a very sincere communist, and I did a video on it, Stalin, a true communist, where he was like, he threatened his own dictatorship to institute what he saw to be the Marxist policy. He thought that they needed to have collectivized agriculture. All of his advisors said this will not work, and it could cause a destabilization of the of the state. And he did it anyway because he believed in it, apparently. And there's no, but I guess you could say it wasn't necessarily intentional. He wasn't trying to kill people. It just happened because that's what happens when you collectivize agriculture. Uh, I can't get my mom a pink handgun unless I want to do it on the black market. You're Australian. Well, get a 3D printer and print a Liberator. Boom. Go to Cody. Go to Defense Distributed by Cody Wilson. Figure it out. Du, du, du. How do you feel about Peter and Erwin Schiff? I think that Erwin Schiff is a hero who died for our sins. I watched Erwin Schiff a long time ago when I was still in college. I watched some of his IRS videos and income tax videos. Um, and I didn't even put together that Peter Schiff was his son. So Erwin Schiff is a hero who was horribly persecuted for what he did, and Peter Schiff is just a really insightful libertarian market commentator. Have you ever heard of the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? He was so powerful, he could even keep those he loved from dying. Because I found Ivan because I was a lolbert who liked your channel. Okay, fair enough. What are your live chats schedule? I don't have a schedule, but it's kind of coming out to Friday and Saturday nights. Uh, may have been a genocide, but not racially motivated by hatred for Ukrainians, but a certainly initiates. Yeah, I don't look. I don't think that Stalin was really racist. I think he just wanted to implement socialism, and uh, when the nationalities got in the way of that, he would destroy them. But when they didn't, he wouldn't. Um, the Liberator, one shot, no kills. The Liberator is also the name of William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist newspaper. So maybe that's what they named it after. But they're the metal ones. They're making. I mean, it's been a couple years now, but they've already started making like uh, what is it? The Model 1911s. So we're getting there. We're getting there. Jews are from the Ukraine. Do, do, do. Have you gone to therapy? Why or why not? No, I have not. I'm still curious, Mohammed, why you commented on this video if you've been watching YouTube for all these years and only just now are commenting. Do, 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 do. I don't know that anyone thought that Stalin was just trying to kill Ukrainians because he was racist against Ukrainians. Uh, Also, sticking up for my boy here, the Russians could certainly have lost World War II. They lost World War One badly, and they also lost to Japan if it wasn't for my boy Stalin. Yes, they could have lost World War II. As it turned out, that they didn't. Um, I think that saying that it's because of Stalin is wrong. Uh, they were kind of in the position they were in because of Stalin. Stalin basically decapitated the military. He helped Hitler. He made World War II possible. His culpability here can't be exaggerated. The only reason, the only way that the Germans were able to invade Poland was with the uh, uh, peace treaty, the alliance with the Soviet Union signed, I think, on August 27th, right? And they invaded Poland 3 days, 4 days later. Uh, so, he enables Hitler that way. He decapitates the Russian military. He then gets into a horrible war with Finland that they almost lose, which encouraged the Germans. And then uh, when they get attacked, in the lead up to the attack, he insists that it's not going to happen. He has anyone who believes that it's going to happen executed, basically. And they lose. I mean, Solzhenitsyn says it kind of well. He goes, "If this is victory, it's worse than any defeat in history in terms of the number of people that they lose." So I think it's very questionable to say whether Stalin is responsible. Like, yes, there was an enormous uh, patriotic fervor. There was an enormous nationalist movement to defend Russia after the attack, but that's not because of Stalin. That's not something Stalin cultivated or created. That's something that probably would have existed otherwise. That wasn't present in World War One because people associated the war with the Tsar, and they didn't have, they had somebody who was worse than the Tsar in a lot of ways. So I think that it's true that Germany could have won World War II, at least in the Soviet field. It's very, very unlikely though if you look at how it played out. And I don't think Stalin helped. I think Stalin hurt. It's kind of like, well, he was there and they won, so he must have helped. Like, that's like saying the United States won World War II because of FDR's great leadership, and that's, I mean, what did FDR do to make the U.S. win World War II? Besides sneaking us into it. So, and Stalin's culpability is far worse than his. So, have you defooed your parents? No. Uh, Who's Bishop Williamson? I don't have a guess, Mohammed. I have no idea why you commented. That's why I asked you. Uh, yeah, I don't know what a cringe pill is. I am Australian, and I probably support us becoming a part of the USA. We are mostly beholden to US political decisions anyway, and if we become a territory of the US, at least I can move there easily. Why do you want to live in the US? And how many other Australians want to become part of the US? Thoughts on Alex Jones and his blackout? I like Alex Jones. He's an over the top fear monger in a lot of ways, but he's still entertaining, and he does have a political philosophy that I agree with largely. I once heard him described as the world's biggest minarchist bulldog, and I think that's fairly accurate. I also think he's a bit of an actor. He's a bit of a showman, but he's been successful with it. I disagree with his deplatforming. I think it's ridiculous that they're drumming up this stuff from Sandy Hook, which I don't even think is that bad. Who cares if he says that they were actors? Whatever. And it's blatantly that's not the reason. It's because he's a Trump supporter and he gets a lot of press and he's got his own platform. I think he's going to do okay though. They only made him more famous, I think. Uh, Cringe pill is the clear pill of Mencius Moldbug amplified. All right, guys. Well, it's 10:30. It's getting late, so I'll give you all a couple chances, but if you have any last questions or anything, feel free to put them up here. But I will say again, check in the link in the descriptions for the podcast. It's free. I'm not selling anything. I just want people to listen, so I have another platform. And also for the Communal Shower subreddit, that's also posted down there. You'll find links to the article on Title IX that I talked about earlier in the video. And yeah, that's everything you want to check out. World War II is just a war because we needed to stop Hitler, ignoring the fact that we sided with the Soviet Union. Yeah, this is kind of it's not solely to Pat Buchanan, but there were a lot of people who said, look, the Soviets are worse than the Nazis in almost every objective way. And how can we call World War II a victory when communism prevails? Um, and I think that you're being really simplistic if you don't have that perspective. And yeah, World War II was a huge disaster. And Stalin, I mean, Stalin is one of the most responsible people for World War II. Hitler is also one of the most responsible people. Patton wanted to attack the Soviet Union after World War II. Yes, and he was probably assassinated for that reason. In fact, there's a new book out there about that, but it seems that I'm not. I don't want to speak too. I haven't examined the evidence, but apparently there's compelling evidence that he was killed by the KGB with the not the help the it was allowed by U.S. intelligence. They allowed it to happen. Uh, I had no idea that Pat Buchanan was that radical. Holy cheese. Well, Pat Buchanan is a paleoconservative, right? And he is not a libertarian. He's against free trade and all that. But they looked at it like the Soviet Union is evil. So we had to fight that. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, he wanted the so-called peace dividend. Um, the what is it? William F. Buckley, the editor of National Review, had said to fight the Soviet Union, we need a tyrannical, omnipotent bureaucracy or something like that to fight communism. And a lot of people said, well, we don't like that idea. We're minarchists. We believe in the Constitution, but okay, we'll go along with it because the Soviet Union's so obviously bad. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of those people said, okay, let's dismantle the empire and cut the federal budget 90% and all this other stuff. People like Pat Buchanan and Joe Sobran and a few others. And most conservatives were like, no, this is the new normal. And we're not going to, we still need this huge army. It was really strange because who are we going to fight with it? You know, Saddam Hussein or Al Qaeda, right? So uh, that shouldn't be radical, but it is. I'm in Miami. Thanks for your content and your time. Well, I appreciate that, Mohammed. Thanks for messaging. I'm flattered that this is the first time you violated your silence on YouTube, and you know it's cool to hear from subscribers all the time. So I do appreciate that. Sound like a cool guy, even if you're an anti-Semite who hates Israel and wants to drive the Jews into the sea. The idea of dating Hispanics, or are you? So you're a Hispanic who lives in Australia? You eating or going to bed? I haven't decided yet. Uh, Pat was the first groiper. Yeah, kind of. Uh, the first would be like Joe Sobran was totally deplatformed for being quote anti-Semitic for opposing the first Gulf War. So I think he's the most Pepe of them all. Pat would be second. Pat somehow managed to weather the storm. I think his mainstream credentials were just too good, having worked for Clinton, having sorry for Nixon, and then also having run for president, and he did well in New Hampshire one year. So he's a little bit too mainstream. Uh, you think there's any hope of a future political alliance in the U.S. among sincere anti-imperialists on the left, anti-war people on the right, libertarians. Um, it's going to be tricky because of the two-party system, right? So yes, you have the anti-war left, but ultimately they're going to vote largely with what the mainstream, power centralist left votes, and the same with the right. If you had multiple parties, I think it would have a better shot. Um, I think the most likely is to have uh, the party in opposition being more anti-war. That's typically what you see. But I don't know. We get all these things like this new dump from Australia or Afghanistan, and it just doesn't move the needle at all. Nobody cares. The U.S. system has kind of worked out this. You have a volunteer army. You don't draft people. You have the troop deployments are low. They're capital intensive, so the casualties are low on the American side. They still happen, and it's still terrible, but they're not like Vietnam. It's not like Korea. It's just a much lower level. Uh, then the narrative of why we're there is so convoluted that people can't even follow it. And so there's just kind of this vague, well, we're making a sacrifice, and these smart people claim that there's a good reason, so I guess it's okay. And also, I'm not getting drafted, so what's the big deal? In fact, I heard that war is good for the economy because Paul Krugman says so, and the New York Times says so, and blah blah blah. So um, there's a lot of bullshit, but the deployments themselves, the total cost of the military industrial complex is immense. We're talking about the Veterans Affair and all the weapons and all the waste that I talk about at the beginning of this video. It's immense. The amount from the actual imperialism, like deployments, it's it's big and it's tragic and it's awful, but it's not that much relative to what people kind of imagine it needs to be that bad. And so as long as we have a growing economy and as long as we have smart people saying that it's justified, a lot of people just don't see it for the bullshit that it is. And even when they do, they're not all that motivated about it. And a lot of this is because of the media, which wants them to be mad about impeachment in Trump, or because Obama was a secret Muslim or didn't have a birth certificate, right? Not that those things aren't interesting or important, but like, where are they on, like, where were they when Obama was drone striking people, American citizens? They're nowhere. And the problem is now we are getting an alternative media, but we've just been saturated with so many people in both parties just being complicit in war that it's just not that big of an issue anymore. But. Does Pat Buchanan have any books worth reading? Probably A Republic, Not an Empire is the best one to look at. And I also think he did one on Churchill that's pretty good. I think it's called like Churchill's War or something like that. And that's where he's taking it even further and making the peace case for Great Britain in World War II. So the peace case, if we look at different countries, the case for that the United States should have made out is pretty strong. The case for Britain staying out is not as strong, but people still make it. And I think he makes it in that book. He's taught, and it's very much drawn on the work of the war with many fathers, about Germany had legitimate claims to Danzig, and the fact that we would go over go to war to prevent the Germans from taking Danzig, which was a German city and had belonged to Germany for a long time, and blah blah blah, doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, so MSN is run by the interests that don't wish to end the war state. Yeah, they're not just MSN, all of them. Yeah, it was really sadly unsurprising how little impact the recent Afghan stuff had. Thanks for your thoughts. It is, look, Trump should be impeached for what happens in Yemen. He should be impeached for what he did in Syria. He should be impeached for continuing the war in Afghanistan. He should be impeached for what happens in Iraq. There's so many things for what happens in Mali and Sudan and all this stuff. All this stuff. And then they go out from the one thing that's not that bad. That's not bad at all, even. And it's because that they're complicit, and also this is within the mainstream now, is that perpetual war on no justification, doesn't, as long as they say they're going to do it. And there's so many vested interests that are into it. It's kind of like a classic special interest situation. You got a couple people who, for some for political reasons, some for ideological reasons, some for financial reasons, who really want a war, right? So the big companies, the Boeings and the Raytheons and the thousands of other contractors, thousands, the tens of thousands of other contractors out there, they all have a fiduciary interest in there being a war, and they fund think tanks and magazines, and they buy ads and they buy influence. So you got that. Then you got politicians. War is popular. I'm a winner. You have Hillary Clinton going to war in Libya so she can, pad her resume. It's just so terrible just to word it that way. That's exactly what she was doing, but that's really common. And then you even have the people who might, for geopolitical reasons, believe in it. There's a big new Brzezinskis of the world, or another kind of sense would be the neocons or the Israel First people who are like, well, they're really motivated by doing what they think is really good for Israel, and if they think what's good for Israel is the U.S. having bases in Iraq or in Syria or in Afghanistan, then that's what they're for. So, and there may be others that I'm not listing here, but you got those. Those are all special interests, right? Those are all interests that the vast majority of people don't have. The vast majority of people are not stockholders in an industrial complex, military industrial complex, or radical Zionist interventionists, or politicians who are going to make political hay out of it. But they're also not. The costs are distributed among this big group. You have 300 million Americans who are paying for probably, if we added up all those people, it probably comes out to 20,000 or 50,000. If you add up all the employees and all the military itself, maybe a couple million, maybe 5 million or something like that. But it's a small group compared to everyone else. And so we disperse the costs over, and just like having a subsidy for sugar in a lot of ways, right? It's the sugar planters, they make millions and it's super important to them. And so they lobby for it. For everyone else, you pay a little bit more every time you buy sugar. So are you going to get really excised about that? No. And Americans aren't getting really excised about it because the cost is distributed. And the moral argument about, well, there are people getting killed, there's all this ideology about states and their authority and their legitimacy. And you've got the other and whatever, and the outrage mob about, a call to the Ukraine, but not to a Hellfire missile onto a wedding. Um, so yeah, it's a really shitty situation. Okay, I've loved you and David D. Friedman, but what do we do to establish truth and goodness in a postmodern world? One, no more circumcision, so we all have foreskins. Two, communal showers, so we all can get along. Boom. Uh, Ooh, I've got a new match. Uh, Trump thoughts on Trump's anti-Semitism bill. I don't know what it says, so I don't know. It sounds like it sucks though. So this, Trump is really playing up that he's a pal of Israel, and the left is becoming more wokely anti-Zionist kind of Israel. So we could see a switch from Jews becoming more right wing, but we'll see. A lot of them do vote in what they perceive to be the interests of Jews more than anything else. Um, so, they favor immigration, mass immigration to the United States, but not to Israel, for instance. So we'll see. I think a lot of Jews in Great Britain voted for Boris, even though many of them are probably Labour. And I don't think that Corbyn was going to exactly implement like a pogrom, but they still voted for him. If you are an atheist, then perpetual war is justified from the materialistic perspective. Uh, we should all just take jujitsu classes and smoke weed. The world that would create world peace. I don't know about that. I don't know about smoking weed, but jujitsu is definitely fun. I'm covered in bruises though, and my hands hurt from gripping so hard. Like, all right, guys. Well, it's been 2 hours and a half, so I think this is a good time to call it quits. But I want to thank everybody who listened to the whole time and commented. I do appreciate it. And I also Thank anyone who wants to go and look at the podcast. Again, that's all free. You don't have to sign up for anything. It's just there. And check out if you're interested the Communal Shower subreddit. I'm trying to get more and more people on there. There's only about 25 members at this point, so it's not very big at this time, but I want it to grow. Yeah, well, until next time, I'll talk to you all later.